Welcome to We Are Untold Stories, where we playfully invite in the unseen, forgotten, intimate, and seemingly impossible on the meandering path to liberation. In a unique guest led format, we'll get lost in the wild to become a little more found in a powerful emergence with intellectuals, spirituals, artists, healers, visionaries, keepers of wisdom, and unsettlers of the settled. I'm your host, Elizabeth Rayner, and today I have the high honor of welcoming our inaugural guest, Dr. Bayo Akomolafe. For those who don't already know and love this work, Bayo is rooted with the Yoruba people in a more than human world. He is a widely celebrated international speaker, posthumanist thinker, poet, teacher, public intellectual, essayist, and author of 2 books, These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Bayo is the founder of the Emergence Network, a planet-wide initiative that seeks to convene communities in new ways in response to the critical civilizational challenges we face as a species. The list of worldly accomplishments goes on and on. I will save that for the show notes. And let's jump in. Bayo, thank you so much for being here. As mentioned earlier when we chatted, you were the only person I wanted to kick off this conversation with for a myriad of reasons. I invite you to get into that wild space you take us in. So, what is your personal untold story?
Wow, my personal untold story. Some part of me wants to leave it untold because it feels that it isn't available for words. It isn't available for language. Beyond just saying that there's a part of me that will never be gentrified into language or clarity, that is held by microbes or microplastics streaming in my brain, or the deep ancestral, where tensions and troubles are still playing out in my large body. Beyond saying all of that, I think the way that I want to respond to the invitation to voice my untold story is to suggest that I'm capably, beautifully, and promiscuously flawed. And I say that because of my public-facing self. And because this is what people see, this square and this, or it's a rectangle, not a square, but whatever shape it is, it's geometric comeliness. The image is so befuddling. It obscures the dynamism of a life never complete, a life still seeking, a life that believes intensely in a particular kind of world and yet meets the ironies of the strength of that belief. Yes, so maybe that's my untold story, my flawed becoming.
I had no clue you were going to go that direction, and I love it so much. You're flawed becoming, because don't we not give ourselves as much permission as we could to just occupy?
Yeah.
We don't give ourselves permission enough. How do you allow that to be?
I don't know, really. I think it's a gift of the moment. We're used to thinking about ourselves as the agents in charge, right? We are the ones that grant permission. We are the ones to see the world in a particular way. We are the ones who have to do the inner work. There's something algorithmically incomplete about that analysis that presupposes we are outside of the fray, outside of the momentum, and that we are merely viewing it from a transcendental perch. So I like to think about the moment and what it makes available, what informs the moment. I found myself recently broken open by things that I realized, I told myself I could never do. And I actually implicitly built my self-narrative around the understanding that I could never do this. But it happened, and I did it. And I realized, wow, I'm not what I think I am. I'm not the agent in charge. I'm not in charge. So yes, I really come from an animist perspective. The psyche is not in our heads. The psyche is larger than the psyche. Yeah.
For someone who's still in the clear perception of being a separate individual that needs to control their environment and control what happens to feel safe in the world, that probably feels really edgy, right? And I know you get this question a lot. What's the secret from your experience and surrendering to that notion when we've been taught that we have to live in these boxes of safety?
Sometimes when I do the things that I do, whether speak or hold court or for some concept or to minister to some moment, people that I speak with, they seem to move the pendulum of their responses from two extreme ends of things. One is soteriological or salvific. It's the idea that we have to save the planet. We have to do this. We have to do something. Sometimes at the end, the texture in the room has changed. And it is often the case that people then say, I now realize that the thing to do is to surrender to it all. I feel that both responses are the same thing, actually. That there's something about saving the world and surrendering to it that still maintains the logic of mastery. Right? One can speak poetically and wax glowingly poetic about surrendering, but there's something, it seems to me, that implicit in the notion of surrender is a coherence of the thing that surrenders. Is a coherence of the self that is making a decision. I choose to surrender. I feel that doesn't carry the weight of the thing I want to investigate, which is how we are already impliedly part of ecological secretions, even in our performances of mastery. How dominance and coloniality and oppression are what the world is doing, in a sense. How we have never been divorced from the thing that we rudely call nature, even when we proliferate plastics, right? And poisons and toxins. That nature is not some rational, homeopathic, utopian bed of beautiful resolutions we have to return to. That the turmoil, the tension, the trouble is also what nature is doing. So there isn't a secret. We're all in on it. We're all in on it. We don't maybe have the words, but we're all in on this. It's an open-ended, awkward universe that we live in. Yeah.
I love the word coherence. If we could all keep that top of mind in our day-to-day as we flow through this journey together. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
About coherence, I recently coined a word called morphostasis. And morphostasis is how things maintain coherence. But the emphasis is not on coherence, is on maintenance. That is, a stone, a piece of rock, is a dynamic mobility. It appears to be still. It appears to be done with. It's an object, as we might say. It's right out there, easily representable. But I'm trying to call attention to the ways that things are in dynamic coactivity, that a rock isn't just simply there. There's a lot of work that it takes to be a rock. There's a lot of dynamism that it takes to be that. Morphostasis is the appearance of stillness that requires a lot of performative participation. I'm trying to say that coherence is the work of postponing incoherence, that knowing already implies not knowing. And sometimes in our everyday goings on, the quest for peace, the quest for stability, the quest for a sense of achievement or a sense of arrival is us already in conversation with the chaos that has never fully been dealt with and will never be dealt with because it's the condition of our very becoming.
Right. In the frame of interdependence, and you can take this any direction you want, what is our collective untold story?
that we are beyond story. There's this piece that I often refer to in one of my favorite movies called Contact. And it's the character Jodie Foster leaning out of an interdimensional travel vehicle, spacefaring, psychedelic thing, or whatever.
Yeah.
She experiences something that is interdimensional, that is not repeatable, something that is unspeakable. She leans outside the window. The director rightly does not show the audience what she sees, but we catch a glimpse that it is unseeable. Her face morphs in the scene of whatever she sees. In that moment, it's sci-fi. There's a lot going on here that I've left out.
Yeah.
And she says to no one in particular, but to everyone in particular, she says, they should have sent a poet. They should have sent a poet. And I think that contrasts with the scientific expectation that is embedded in modernity, that we are increasingly coming to the end of discovery. It's not voiced this way, but there's a sense in which there's a story we tell, that the world might entirely be story-able or might be storied, that all we need is the right language. And if we can spread and colonize dark matter, the other regions that are outside of our civilized ethics, if we can do that, then the world will be conquered. We would finally know what molecules are thinking and dreaming about, or what electric sheep dream about when they sleep. Hats off to Philip K. Dick. So I think the story, the untold story of our collective, is that there are things that cannot be storied. There are things outside of meaning, and that we are large and sprawling in our vastness. And that means we have to make do in a world of partial traces, where things will never be fully justified, rationalized, or rendered visible.
And isn't that the most amazing gift at the same time? We want crisp and linear and logical, very left brain to be dualistic. But what if we can't? And then the opportunity on the other side of that is colossal.
It is. It is. I would rather live in a universe that I cannot explain than live in a universe that has been finally articulated. Because the sense of wonder seems to be my driving motivation. I shared this recently, that I grew up in a churched and churchy world. And of course, whatever the pastor of the day or the man of God of the day was saying at the time could always be reduced to God is in charge. God made everything. And even though I didn't find the words that I now easily, conveniently deploy, and the terms that I have seemingly gained some mastery with, it seems what I was trying to say then in my privacy was, God made everything, yes, but everything is just a small part of what I'm interested in. Right? Everything is so tiny. There's something, but of course, that's just a poetic way of saying that there are things that exceed everything as a category. And that is the most emancipatory, liberating thought that I think I can be possessed by.
We've just solved everything. We have the answer. We don't need to have any more episodes. We just finished the whole conversation. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm really into holistic, natural well-being. From one of your books, We Will Tell Our Own Story. There's a quote, traditional top-down institutions have failed critically in answering our deep-seated questions about things that really matter to our well-being. Going back into that whole linear place, can you put some wonder in there and answer how you think we can co-create new life-affirming values, ecosystems, realities in that space of wonder that might serve?
I'm thinking of the camel right now. And as a hypothetical, we place the camel at the beginning of history and we place it at the very edge of a desert. And that's the camel's challenge. The challenge is, of course, the question, how do I pass through this? How do I go through this? The desert is a very hard place, I've been told. How do I go through this? So the camel takes a first step in it, in the desert, and its questions and its experiments and its failures and the things done to it and the things that it tries to do and all the failures along the way somehow become the conditions for the emergence of camel humps, right?
Yeah.
The camel never really answers the question because the question is unanswerable. The question of climate change, pandemics, Gaza, they're not answerable in a final way. But somehow in the struggling with the questions, in the vortices of encounter that the questions and its cousins proliferate, we are changed. We are changed by that. Not always in productive ways, not always in anticipatory or anticipated ways, but we are changed. We're sprouting camel humps, in a sense. And that's where the desert lives, in our humps. We are becoming hybridized. We've always been hybridized, never pure. It's that we are, and I don't mean to be fatalistic or deterministic, but I think we are already in the process of being changed. In asking that question, you have already tinkered with a cosmic thread that might ripple out in some other way that is molecular and is minor, but is the very condition for how change happens. I think we're already in it. And it doesn't resolve along the lines, it doesn't exclusively or uniquely resolve along the lines of whether you're good or bad, or whether you've done the work or not. I think there's a sense in which we're already co-creating new worlds. Not creating, but co-creating. It's a vital difference. Yes.
It's the slow, steady progression of the co-creation that we're sitting in, which is exciting and beyond liberating in and of itself, that reclamation. Right. I feel a lot of us are sitting in a liminal space, longing to find our way back. It's an opportunity to meet ourselves again, as if for the first time. What do you feel is the most unseen, the most forgotten? What's wildly essential?
That is a phrasing of note. What's wildly essential is like an oxymoron. Because if it's wild, it's not essential. And if it's essential, it's probably not wild. It's civilized. It's pure. It's there. The wildness of it feels like a deterritorialization of essentialism. So I like that phrasing then. I like the tension it holds. What's wildly essential feels to me to be an exploration of our tentacularity. By that, I mean that there is the vocation of care that is carried by our contemporary modern moments that wants us to return to an idea of authenticity, or it rather wants us to, in the spirit of authenticity, return to an originality. Now, I don't think about the world in terms of originality and copies or linear evolutionary pathways from a single destination. I think we co-create destinations and we perform originality in a sense, so that we're already messed up in the sense that is conveyed by the goddess in the Indian pantheon called Akhilandeshvari, whose name means the one who is never not broken. So I think we are already all of these things, but specificity is needed here, I think, to carry the potency of these imaginations. I would think that as the practices, the civilizational practices of care that we're used to, the idea of white modernity, and by whiteness, I don't mean white people, a certain posture, a certain geometry of experience, I think it's hollowing out. I think it's losing its creativity. I think we are at the end of the world as we know it. And this meshwork of relations that has held our bodies and given us pressure and gravity is losing its engine power. And so we're floating, we're lost, our GPS systems aren't working. What I think is required now is a sense of descent, is a sense of holding each other, is a sense of researching together, is a sense of inquiry that isn't premised on arriving at the usual value systems that we're used to, but is a willingness, a courageous willingness to follow along artistic pathways. That is, my people would say, in order to find your way, you must become lost. And there's something really powerful about that that is held by your phrasing of a wildly essential thing to do. So I think we must investigate lostness. It may look like art. It may look like grieving together. It may look like what I call a post-activism. But I think there are spaces, queer spaces opening up in the world right now that requires investigation.
I love the descent comment. It feels like an ascension, not a descension.
Yes.
But it's coming back down.
Yes.
Can you share more about queer spaces? I think it's really important to talk about it.
Yes. I often launch out into a discussion about these kinds of spaces by first prefacing, or rather privileging another conversation about what I call a sensorium. That is, we don't sense inward or sense independently. We sense together. We know the world together. There's no knowing that is not a knowing with. There is no sensing that is not a sensing with. There's no acting or thinking that is not an acting and a thinking with, respectively. So we do these things together, and sometimes the space where this happens becomes carceral. And by carceral, I mean it becomes so dense and thick and unyielding in its rigidity that it does not permit the kinds of future holding rituals that we're used to. It doesn't allow us to see well. It doesn't allow us to do well, or the kinds of differences we hope to see in the world in performing these rituals only come back to us dead. Think about what a dear brother of mine, whose name is Orland Bishop, calls the largest ritual on the planet: money. He thinks of money as the largest ritual of the planet. We're constantly in this ritual, exchanging it and thinking of value and place and belonging in this ritual. I feel that ritual is becoming stuck on itself, or rather it's come to a critical edge of its creativity. We used to think that if we threw money at it, we could exchange something that we don't have yet. We could throw it at the future and buy ourselves a green future. We could throw it at uncertainty and buy ourselves some confidence and certitude about how the future might look. But money itself seems resistant to that kind of vocation. So again, the point here seems to be that we're stuck, and we're in this ritualistic stuckness, and we're impoverished by this stuckness. But within this systemicity of stuckness is our openings of some kind. We didn't make the openings happen. It just seems to be openings that are occasioned by the density of our relations. Many philosophers call these openings different things. I might call them cracks. And a crack is where the monster shows up. The monster is all the hidden tensions within a system coming together. The crack is an archive of incompleteness. The crack is where our failures show up. So anywhere, when you ask me about queer spaces, anywhere where our bodily refusal to be productive shows up is a crack. It feels like a crack to me. It's not your crack and my crack. It's the crack of a sensorium. It's not personal. It's deeply impersonal. Yeah, it looks like everywhere. It doesn't have to be a convening, a gathering, a workshop, a retreat, some already named practice. It's everywhere the world is incomplete. Everywhere we don't have language for. Everywhere where failure seems to be the most compelling treatise or vocation. That's what a crack looks like to me. What we do with it is another question altogether.
I love the money being the biggest ritual, and I
Right.
love the resistance of the money.
Yeah.
I think of money, please. I didn't want to be this important. I just wanted to kind of play
Mm-hmm.
with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about the density of relations and the meshwork of relations. And then we have the opportunity with the crack. There seems a bridge in there. I'm wondering, in very simple terms, what could people do to connect that? And I know it's not a simple answer.
It's not a simple answer, but it's not a simple question either. There's something speculative about this, but it's also deeply pragmatic. Think about, and here's an example offered by Sherry Mitchell, who's an author and a sister of mine. Think about driving along the highway, the Mass Pike or something, and I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of experience driving on that highway, but I'm not sure if there are places to pull over. But imagine, what do you say there are few? Yeah. Imagine that you are suddenly overcome by a feeling of grief that is, in retrospect, isn't fully yours, and yet is yours in the same time, but not fully, because it seems to not be occasioned by any immediately observable occurrences in your own life, right? You just feel a wave of sadness. Now, the ways that we may explain that as psychologists is to refer to your own experiences, to look deep into your own developmental pathways, to say something happened to you when you were a child, or you're experiencing some trauma that needs analysis, psychoanalysis to be specific, to be rendered more explicit. We're good at looking inwards. We're not good at looking around. This is James Hillman. We're not good at looking around. Sherry Mitchell proposed, what if the grief I feel is the mourning of a whale in the ocean grieving the loss of her child? What if the grief I feel is the waltzing of a leaf in the change of the seasons from its branch to the compostable ground? What if we are not as isolated, insular, protected, safe, independent, magisterial as we think we are? It's very simple and yet also difficult to convey without a sense of poetry, that maybe we're caught up in these affairs and maybe we have been performances of a system that can only think in terms of isolation and cold data. Maybe what Nora Bateson calls warm data. It's for us to think about the relational spaces between that is not usually thought of as proper knowledge. To folks who are wondering what I speak about when I speak about cracks, I'm speaking about those stranger vocations in the room that are really not available for language yet, like feeling a leaf fall into the earth. I remember my wife, EJ, had a moment a couple of months ago, and she said, I feel sad. And I did the thing that clinical psychologists or psychotherapists might want to do. I tried to list out all the things that might occasion that sadness. And we didn't get to anything that might do that. And I recall myself saying, maybe it isn't your sadness. Maybe it's the wind blowing through. Maybe it has enlisted you. But maybe, can we just hold this idea that it's passing and it's not yours to hold firmly to? That's a crack of some kind. And what we do with it is usually consequential. We're used to putting a Band-Aid on it. A pandemic has occurred. Let's get back to normal. right? But what if the pandemic is what we've been queerly praying for, but we don't know how to host?
We're good at looking within, we're not good at looking around. So important. It allows such a connection with the unseen. That is really the only place that I feel we live. You also have a 5-day event coming up, I think October, right? Becoming Monster.
Oh, yes, we have a festival. It's the Emergence Network that will be hosting this. Of course, I, as in my role as visionary founder, will play some role in it, but it's not centrally me. And yes, this is October, and it will be an exploration of how we are already changing and how the human has never been us, right? Elizabeth is a human and I'm a human. I think that's true to a certain extent. Of course, to say that is already to invoke racialized politics, many notions of the biological. Very troubling tensions exist in making that attribution of being human. But I think the vocation here is to sense that the human is already a vocation of the monstrous. Just like I said, morphostasis, to be still is to be in dynamic conversation with mobility. To be human is to be in dynamic conversation with monstrosity, with all the things that we push out. Just like to be American is to maintain borders, right?
Well, that's a whole other topic, but yes, that makes so much sense. But please continue. What were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that the idea here is not that becoming monster is a new thing that we have to do, like a new task, a new ideology. It's a particular reading, and it's speculative, but it's the invitation to trouble the idea that we've arrived, and is an invitation to research those spaces that are opening up in the sensorium, in our experiences of being mothers and fathers and activists and grandparents and children and politicians and doulas and healers. There's something that is calling us to change color. Just like I'm experiencing the change of seasons, and the green is now giving way to a redness, to a goldenness. How do leaves know how to do that? We're doing that as well. We're becoming a different color. And that's frightening, but it's also exciting to see.
And like you said, it's not something that requires great effort. A lot of people, when they hear, okay, now after all this, I'm exhausted and I'm traumatized and I have to go do this whole thing of becoming this other entity. I'm excited about the idea. It's a reclamation in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's the language of reclamation, in as much as it touches on a wildness beyond our fenced belonging, feels appropriate here in the ways that I would use it. Yes. It's not an assimilation. It's not an inclusivity in the ways that Carl Jung might speak about shadow work, right? Let's take more into the light of consciousness. No, it doesn't feel that way to me. It's like a meeting of swampland, and we're stuck in our betweenness, and what to do isn't immediately clear to us. That feels more like it.
Yeah, and being okay with it not being immediately clear. We have to allow and see what's beyond the periphery of what's comfortable.
I agree.
Is there anything else that you feel like you wanted to share, Bayo, in the conversation? Anything left unsaid?
Not at all. It's been a dance, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much. I will put all the notes for people to check out Becoming Monster and other festivals and events. If you don't know this work, please dig in, because you might find something incredibly surprising and liberating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.
That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. I genuinely hope you found something emergent in the conversation. To learn more about today's guest, including links and resources related to our discussion, visit the episode page at weareuntoldstories.com. You'll also find the entire podcast archive there. If you'd like to support this work, the most meaningful and impactful way is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and leave a review or comment. As always, sharing the show with those who may be interested is immensely appreciated. For podcast updates, please subscribe to the newsletter or find us on Instagram. A special credit goes to the world-class drummer and musician, my one and only brother, Scott Rayner, for the original theme music. Finally, thanks so much for the love and support. See you back here soon to continue the journey beyond the known borders of meaning.